The sun hadn't even risen yet over Manhattan's skyline when Thomas Rivera clocked in for his shift at Greenwood Children's Hospital. His work boots were worn thin, his uniform slightly too loose from skipped meals, and his hands calloused from years of hard labor. But none of that mattered. What mattered to Thomas was that his 7-year-old son, Eli, was safe. After losing his wife to a drunk driver 2 years ago, Thomas had taken every job he could to keep them afloat. Janitor at night. Delivery driver on weekends. He never complained, because Eli was all he had left. That morning, Thomas pushed his mop cart into the long, polished corridors of the children's neurology wing, humming quietly. The air always smelled like bleach and something sterile, but also something more, like heartbreak. In room 407, behind a curtain of cold glass and high security, sat the most guarded heart in the entire hospital. Her name was Isla Beaumont. 8 years old. Daughter of billionaire real estate mogul Charles Beaumont. Hair like silk, eyes always searching, sometimes for hope, sometimes for escape. And legs that had never once taken a single step. Doctors called it spinal muscular atrophy. Expensive specialists flew in from around the world. She had the best physiotherapists, the most high-tech wheelchairs, a private nurse. But despite it all, Isla's muscles were weak. Her bones were delicate. And her spirit? It was vanishing. Thomas had only ever seen her through the window until one day, she asked for a book. Not through her nurse. Not through a doctor. Through her own cracked voice, barely above a whisper. Eli had been sitting nearby, playing with a paper plane, when Isla noticed him. "Who's he?" she asked. "That's my son," Thomas replied, surprised. "Eli. Can he come in?" she asked, eyes not leaving the boy. That was the moment everything changed. Eli entered the room with his usual sunshine smile. He wasn't scared of her machines. He wasn't interested in her last name. He just sat beside her bed and showed her how to make paper planes. Isla laughed. For the first time in months. The next day, Eli brought her a drawing. Then a toy. Then a storybook he insisted on reading to her with dramatic voices and wild arm movements. Every day after school, while Thomas cleaned floors, Eli visited Isla. And somehow, slowly, the darkness in her eyes began to lift. Weeks passed. Eli asked Isla why she never got out of bed. Isla just looked down at her legs and shrugged. "I can't." "Have you tried?" he asked innocently. Her lips trembled. "Everyone says I can't. Even my dad." The truth was, Charles Beaumont had buried himself in meetings and mansions in misery ever since his wife died giving birth to Isla. He paid for everything except time, attention, and hope. To him, weakness wasn't an option. And Isla, his only daughter, became another project to fix. When nothing worked, he gave up. His visits became fewer. His love, more distant. One evening, Thomas overheard Eli saying something that struck him deep in the chest. "You know what my dad always tells me?" Eli said, folding another paper crane. "Sometimes, people don't need to believe in you. You just gotta believe in yourself first." Isla looked at him like he'd spoken a spell. That night, Thomas sat on the edge of his bed, Eli asleep beside him, and made a decision. He couldn't give Isla millions. He couldn't offer her fame or specialists or a cure. But maybe, just maybe, he could give her what no one else had. A chance. The next morning, Thomas asked her nurse if he could help Isla try something small. Just sitting up straighter. Moving her arms. Maybe, eventually, swinging her legs off the bed. At first, the nurse hesitated. But Isla said yes. "I want to try." The journey wasn't pretty. Isla cried. She fell. Sometimes she begged to stop. Her father scoffed at the idea when he heard about it. "You're a janitor," he snapped. "You think you can succeed where doctors failed?" Thomas looked him in the eye and said, "I don't know." But she smiled for the first time in months. That has to count for something. Charles didn't respond. He turned and walked away. But Isla didn't. She kept trying. Every evening, Thomas and Eli came in after cleaning duties. They played music, did stretches, held her hands, laughed through the pain, cried through the failures. Days turned into weeks. And slowly, unbelievably, Isla moved. First a toe. Then her foot. Then one morning, while Eli held her hand and Thomas stood behind her,